Before I show you what functions are, I want to show you a bit of a problem that we would have. If, let's just say, let's just use, I don't want to use value because I use the word value to describe an actual value of something. So let's not make it confusing. Name, just name. So what if you said if true, if name is true, console.log this, whoops, should do the tab, log, then log this, then finish by logging this. Okay, let's see what happens here. So it's just going to log all these things. And then what if name and true? So let's just assume that right here there was a lot of code in between these two if statements here. And then here you wanted to do this again. So it's just doing the same thing twice. But what if you had another if statement? You had more code, so your program was running, it was doing things, and then you would want to check something to see if something was true or whatever it was you were doing. It really doesn't matter. The point is, you're going to get to a point where you want to run these 3 lines of code again. And these lines of code are sort of just filler for what your program would actually be doing, because console.log doesn't actually do anything. These are just filler for, if imagine you were running actual application code, you were saying, if this is true, then do this, like run this code that will actually change parts of your application. And let's just say you want to run these 3 things in sequence, because these 3 things, let's just say the first thing would find something, the second thing would do something with that, and then the last thing would put that thing back where it belongs in its updated value. Whatever it was, it doesn't matter. It's just the point is you want to do these 3 things in sequence, and you want to do them often. Okay, so for that, we could use a function. A function is basically like storing these lines of code into a name of something, kind of like a variable, where you store it in a name, the name of your function, and then when you could call that function, and when you called that function, it would just execute the code that was inside your function. So it would look like this. Function do logging. Okay, so this is what it looks like. I'm going to break this down a little bit. So it starts with the function keyword. Like variables start with var or let or const, functions start with function. Then the name of your function, and then inside these parentheses, for now we're not going to be putting anything, but before the end of the video we will put something in there. And then sort of like an if statement, you'd put 2 of these, the curly braces, drop a line, and then everything in here is your function code. And we want to do this. Whoops, I'm not really sure what was wrong with the indentation. I guess it doesn't matter. So function do, this should have another G, do logging. Okay, so right now we could replace this instead of doing that repetitive code, we could just say, I did it again, I forgot the G, do logging. Okay, now let's try. And it works. And notice that the function comes after this. So you might think, how is it doing logging if doing logging is only declared down here? I'm not going to get too in depth with why this happens. Basically, the function, when the code gets compiled, it like moves it to the top. So even though in the code written here, it comes after, JavaScript sort of like has this compiling phase where it takes your code and it sort of like prepares it for its actual execution. And while it's doing that, it will take this and put it to the top. This is known as hoisting. So that's why it works. Even though do logging only comes after it being called, it's actually as if it was above. So that's why it works. And the great thing about this is earlier we had our code, we had these three lines, they were repeated. So if you ever wanted to change something, you would have to change it in two different places. Now we could do, we could change it once and then it just changes automatically everywhere because this is just running this code. When you call this, which as you could probably assume by now, I didn't really explain this, but to call the function, you just put the name of the function followed by the parentheses and then the semicolon. So now it's going to happen 3 times. Okay, and let's get rid of all this. And let's make another function called say hi. And this is just going to say hello. Let's say hello plus name. Now when we click run, nothing's going to happen because we're not actually calling it. We're creating the function, but we're not doing anything with it. It's sort of just sitting there. To actually use the code, we have to call it like we did before in the if statements. Oh yeah, what's that? See, NaN. I'm assuming that it tried to do math. I accidentally put a comma here. No comma. So hello Jesse. And then because you're using a variable, you could change this name to be anything. You could say hello world. And it just says hello world. Which is kind of okay. But what if you wanted to call it with like a different person's name? So let's just say let friends, well I can't spell, friend's name equal to Sam. I'll put my name back here, Jesse. And then here you would just say friend's name. Hello Sam. Now this isn't very flexible code. This is actually really bad because we had to change this. At first this was referring to my name, and then I wanted to be somebody else's name, so I had to change it inside here. That's where arguments come in. Now arguments are, I've seen beginners get sort of confused by arguments, so I want to hopefully explain this in the best way so you completely understand what an argument is. I sort of already explained the problem that it solves, and that problem is just that if you want to call say hi, but change the name you're saying hi to, you're saying hello to someone, whoever's name. Now, you can do, before calling say hi, you could say name is equal to Sam, or you could say it could be anything. But this is still inflexible because it requires you to change the value of your variable. You might not want to do that. So what you can do is inside this parentheses here, you could put a variable, basically. We could say name. Now this is still going to work here, but it's actually not. Let's click run. Now it's saying hello undefined. That's because now we're running it, but there's nothing in here. Because we put something in these parentheses, when we call the code, we have to put something in these parentheses. And so before name was referring to this name, but now name is referring to the name right here, which is a name that only exists while that function is running. Let's just say To make this a bit less confusing, I want to delete these. Now let's click run again. Hello undefined. Great. So here you would just put a name to call this with. So now when you call this, this function is going to run, this code is going to run, and the name, it's going to say hello plus name, and this name value is going to be equal to whatever it is that you passed into it, which in this case I'm just passing my name. So now when you click run, it just says hello Jesse. And this is very flexible because you can call it again just like that and just have it run different code. And you can run this as many times as you want. And each time it's going to run slightly different code. And you could have more than one argument. You could, I don't know, you could say greet. And then here you could just say greet plus name. So this is a bit backwards. Actually, let's change it because it's a little backwards. Because you're using the greet before the name, so you might as well put them in the actual order they come. So here, I'm console.logging something, but now I'm only console.logging whatever it is that I'm passing into it. So I could do hello, and it runs this. So the value of greet is hello, comma, space, and the value of name is Jesse, and inside the code it takes those and it puts them together and it returns hello Jesse. And we could run completely different code. What's up, Sam? Okay, what did I do here? There's no plus. No, it's not that. It's that I forgot the comma. So when you're putting the arguments in, you got to put the comma. Okay, and so right up here, when you're creating these things right here, these are known as parameters in the function, and then when you add them, these are known as arguments. So you might hear the word parameter and arguments used interchangeably. They're not the same thing. Parameters refer to what the function is declared with, and your arguments are the things that are different every time when you run your function. I wish that we were done, but we're not done. This video is getting pretty long, but functions are really important, so it's okay. I'll try to finish quick. The next thing is return values. So let's say function add. Whoops, it's supposed to be one of these. Function add. So the purpose of this function would be to call it, add in two numbers, and the function will return that number to you. So far we've seen undefined pop up a lot. That's what happened the last time we called something. It returned undefined, which all functions return something. So the return keyword looks like this. Let's just say return 1. Now let's call add, and it's going to return 1. So even if you don't actually return anything, it's still returning undefined. So there's that. Now here we don't want to just return 1. We want to actually we can create a variable inside here called calculated and make it equal to number 1 plus number 2, and then we could return calculated. Now this is going to be not a number. That's because nothing was passed in. So let's just do this. and that is actually perfectly equal to 1,000. That's kind of weird. Let's change it up a bit. So now this add function could add any two numbers. You could pretty cool. Okay, and the return. Another thing that's important to notice about this is that not only does it return that value out of the function, it stops the function code from running. It stops right there. So if you had a console.log that just said done, this will never get run, because once the return keyword is hit, the function stops at that line of code. So done isn't going to be logged. Okay, and okay, I want to go back to return, because you might not fully get what it is doing right now. So I want to show you it in an expression. Let my number is equal to 100 plus add. So add is basically an expression. It's going to get reduced to a single value, and it's going to get reduced to whatever gets returned. So actually, I don't know what this is going to get returned to, so let's just do something that's easy to calculate. So we know that add just adds the two numbers together and then returns it. So because it returns it, it's sort of the expression becomes whatever it gets returned to. So we know that 53 is going to get returned. So that's like doing 100 plus 53. And then my number is going to be equal to, let me copy this. I didn't realize that okay. Then my number is going to be equal to 153. So if I didn't return anything here, if I just calculated it and did nothing with it, let's see this. It's going to be not a number, because it's basically doing 100 plus undefined. Because like I said earlier, this functions always return something. If you don't explicitly return something, it just returns undefined for you. And again, you could call this with anything you want. And then my number will always be different if you always change it. That's not really the point though. The point is the return. So how you could use add in a math calculation, because add just gets returned or gets reduced to whatever it returns. Okay, let me just delete this. And I could also show you that add, if you use it in an if statement, truthy. This is going to get called because basically it's returning a number that isn't 0. And if we don't return anything, as a mini challenge for you, I want you to guess if this is going to return, if this is going to console.log truthy or not. So is it going to be truthy or falsy? It's not going to console.log falsy, but it's falsy if it doesn't log anything. So it's not going to log anything, because since it's not returning anything right now, it's, no matter what you do with these numbers here, you could put anything you want, and it's always just going to return undefined. So this just gets evaluated as undefined, and undefined is falsy, so nothing's going to get logged here. The done gets logged because it's not returning anymore. Then if I do this, this gets logged, but not the done. Okay, I'm almost done. I just want to show you one more thing, that a function could call itself or other functions. So console.log, we're going to make a function that logs every count that counts down from the number you passed into it down to 0. So console.log int, and usually you could use a loop, but we didn't cover loops yet, so I'm not going to use a loop. I could just do it with an if statement. I could say if the int that you passed into it is greater than 0, so let's say you call count down. Let's say you call count down with 10. It's going to log it. It's going to, when you run the code, it's going to log 10, and then it's going to check if 10 is greater than 0. And if it is, you want to call countdown. And what do you want to call countdown with? Well, you don't want to call countdown with int. You want to call countdown with int minus 1. And this will just count down from 10 to 0. Because you call it with 10, and then the first time it calls it with 9, and then it gets called again with 9 this time, and then it logs 9, and then it checks, is 9 greater than 0? It is. So it just keeps going over and over again until it gets called with 0. And if you put else console.log not greater than 0, then at the end, the last thing that gets logged is not greater than 0. That means that this code didn't run and countdown didn't get called again. And you can call this with a big number too, and it'll just log all the numbers. I don't think it did all of them though. I thought it would. Let's see 5,000. Whoops. Yeah, so 5,000 just counted down pretty quickly. Anyways, that's going to be it for this video.